live in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Good evening, everybody. This is a call to order for the finance meeting. The time is now 6:21. I apologize for the delay, but there's some technical difficulties that had to be worked out. We are now ready to roll. In attendance is committee member Ms. Bobby Brown, myself, committee chair, board member Albert Benahan. From the staff, we got Ms. Marlene Siegel, director of finance, Ms. Nadira Clark, Ms. Liz Maurer, Mr. Fusco, Ms. Valle, and Mr. Garrity. Okay, the first item on the agenda is approval of minutes dated January 13th, 2021. Do I have a motion to approve?
Motion to approve.
I will second that motion. I find to myself no material errors or omissions. Ms. Brown, do you have anything to?
Nope.
That needs attention? All right, so hearing no objections or changes needed, all in favor of approving the minutes?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Next up on the agenda is the 2021 budget update. Ms. Siegel, we just received the next two items before we start. The next two items, we just received a basic update last week. So if it, in the interest of time, since we got a little bit of a late start, we could just, any brief changes or something, if we could highlight those, unless anybody's interested in a more comprehensive review again.
Yes, good evening, everyone. I'm going to provide a brief update. Just bear with me one moment, please. I'm just going to, as I usually do, share my notes so that it is easier for you to follow my remarks. All right. So in regard to 2020-21, we are currently working on the third formal fiscal forecast of the fiscal year. That will be the February 28th financial condition report, and it will be posted in the first week of March. At this point, we continue to project a balanced condition, and using current projections, we are in the process of assessing whether we will continue to need to draw from the ISF, Internal Service Fund, specifically the pre-2018-19 component, which has the $2 million surplus that we've been carrying forward. I also wanted to mention in regard to FEMA, we have spoken in the past about FEMA reimbursement. We have been informed that all Board of Education items, and this would apply throughout the United States to all school districts, are not allowable under FEMA guidelines, which state that other grants received by organizations should be utilized first prior to being considered by FEMA. So FEMA, in making this regulation, is referring to other federal grants, such as the CARES Act grant and the new ESSER II grant, as well as the coronavirus relief grant. So it's understood that we're going to continue to utilize our federal COVID relief grants to support COVID-related expenditures. And the city did provide some assistance by absorbing $53,000 of Board of Ed COVID-related expenses into the city's CRF grant. I'd just like to give a quick update on a few budget variables. First of all, in regard to the Nutrition Center, we've spoken at each prior meeting this school year about the projected shortfall due to reduced level of revenue comparison with expenditures. And at this point, we continue to project a shortfall between 4 and 5 million. At this point, it appears to be toward the higher end, meaning we are building into our forecast 4.8 million. We remain hopeful that it will be lower. However, it could also be slightly higher. But at this point, the number in the forecast will be $4.8 million. Our efforts continue to increase participation and result in revenue as well as to reduce expenditures optimally. I did mention last time that the state of Connecticut is aware of the challenge faced by all districts, and I believe it's also a nationwide issue in that districts operating food and nutrition programs are encountering reduced revenue. Fortunately, we have savings in other areas, and so we are able to compensate. But we believe that the state of Connecticut is exploring options for providing resources to the districts. However, at this point, we do not have any concrete information, and therefore we continue to project the shortfall that I mentioned without any offsets from the state. We're using our internal offsets in our operating budget. Also, the Juvenile Detention Center, the revenue is projected to be lower by about 50% this year. That's $400,000. I have mentioned this previously. There isn't any change in that projection. With regard to special ed out-of-district expenses, the excess cost cap in the current year will be finalized, we expect, in March. It was 29.11% in the prior year, 2019-20. As a reminder, the higher the cap, the higher the expense for our district. On a positive note, the number of out-of-district students is lower than in the prior year, but our expenses for special education, in terms of new classes, resource teachers, transportation, and related services have been rising. And as I mentioned, the juvenile detention revenue, which offsets that cost, is also lower. And Medicaid reimbursement revenue continues to be projected at a lower level than in the prior year. But we anticipate at this time, and this is subject to change, that the negative and positive variables will balance, and ultimately we will have a neutral condition. On the positive side, I've mentioned transportation previously, in particular the savings that we've derived from the shortened school year, 177 school days compared to 182 in a traditional school year. And so we have been using those savings to offset the loss of revenue in other areas. And we are tracking savings in other areas, substitute staffing, athletics, security, and legal services. And the savings are built into our projections and are helping to offset the loss of revenue in the other areas and contribute to the projection of a balanced condition. So once again, our intent is to achieve savings to the greatest extent possible, and hopefully by the end of the year, we will have a surplus condition and be able to carry forward funds as we did at the end of 2019-20 in August of 2020. And just as a reminder, we continue to operate in deficit prevention mode, and deficit prevention mode helps us to maintain a balanced condition. And we continue to implement standard practices for stringent cost control and management. We capture accrued funds in all areas in order to build reserves to support a balanced budget and hopefully generate a surplus condition. And we are continuing to aim to expand our rollover capacity for 21-22. So that completes a brief report on 2020-21. And if there are any questions, I'll be happy to answer them. And then we can move on to just a few comments about the process for 21-22 when you're ready.
Okay, Ms. Siegel, thank you very much. I don't have any questions. Before I ask anybody if they got any questions, I would like to point out that, for the record, Ms. Chairman Weldon has joined the meeting.
Hello?
Ms. Brown, do you have any questions?
No questions.
Mr. Benahan?
Yes, I have a question. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ms. Siegel, please say, I'm sorry, I apologize if I ask you this question, if you really tell us, but I was a little confused. When you say about the COVID-19, the budget and stuff like that, question for you is, do they have a budget different for the COVID-19 for the bilingual department, or bilingual classes for Bridgeport, or everything's included in the same budget for BOE?
Excuse me. There are bilingual classrooms is that your question?
Yeah, is a budget separate for the bilingual department,
No, it's
bilingual,
not. It's not separate. There are certain schools, such as Marin and Batella and Johnson, that have bilingual classes. And those classes are allocated as part of our staffing model. They're identified in the allocation model that is posted in September of each year, and I continue to update it throughout the year if there are any adjustments. In addition, we have English language learners who, some of whom may be in those bilingual classes, and others who may need English language instruction from ESL teachers. So they may not be in a bilingual class based on the criteria, but they receive supplemental instructional services from ESL teachers. And those positions are allocated as part of our allocation model. They are funded in the operating budget. Now, in addition to the operating budget, as I believe everyone is aware, because I've included it in the overall reports on the budget, and in the budget in the budget request, we included information about federal and state funding sources for English language learners. There is a federal Title III grant, which is intended to support bilingual and ESL education, and that is how we use that grant. And there is a state bilingual grant, and those funds are targeted to support our bilingual services. There's also an immigrant grant, which has been reduced, and I've shared that information. It's been reduced significantly. I believe it's under $30,000 for the current year. So in general, the positions and the support services, meaning curricular materials, instructional resources, professional development, would be supported in the operating budget and supplemented by federal and state grants that are targeted to English language learners. We also utilize our Title IIA grant, which is intended for the support of teacher recruitment and also administrator recruitment and professional development, to support professional development across the entire spectrum of subject areas.
Does that answer your question, Mr. Benahan? Uh-oh. Hello? Did I get thrown out of the meeting? Hello?
Looks like he's muted.
Mr. Benahan? It looks like he's frozen.
Oh,
Oh, he's gone. Do you have any questions, Mr. Weldon? Before
No.
we move on? Thank you. All right, if Albert comes back and needs more information, I guess we could have
My time went off. I'm back. Thank you.
get back. Did that answer your question?
She answered me the question, yeah, but I'll just go back later and then heard what she said. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
All right. Okay, Ms. Siegel, you may take the next item on the agenda, which is 2021-22 budget request status.
All right, thank you. I just wanted to share a few comments on the next steps. So the 21-22 budget request and the Food and Nutrition Services budget plan were both approved by the Board of Ed at the special meeting held last week on February 3rd. I understand that this Friday we'll have a Zoom meeting with the state delegation on the state legislative session and the state budget, in particular, the budget for education. And then in the February-March timeframe, the superintendent will confer with the mayor and the city administration about the Board of Education's budget request for 21-22. April 6th is the date, as per city charter, when the mayor will submit the proposed general fund budget to the city council. And then in April, usually in the second or third week, the board will meet with the City Budget and Appropriations Committee. On May 11th, the City Council will submit the adopted budget to the mayor. By May 25th, the mayor can veto the City Council's adopted budget, and then on June 1st, that's the last day for the City Council to vote on the mayor's veto, if there is a veto, of the City Council's adopted budget. So just to remind everyone, by June 1st, as happens every year, the city budget is final. Right now, as far as the state budget is concerned, usually we would have a state budget by May, but that isn't guaranteed. And so if it does happen on schedule, then by June 1st, we would be aware of the state allocation to the district and the city allocation in terms of the addition to the MBR. With regard to the state, we are anticipating, as I explained in the budget request, in addition to the Alliance ECS component of our budget, and based on the prior state announcement last year, it's anticipated that Bridgeport would receive at least $2.3 million in additional funds in Alliance ECS. Now, that is not guaranteed, but that is the amount that we were expecting. That is the amount that we included in our budget plan for next year. And we're going to remain optimistic that we will receive at least that amount and hopefully a higher number. Thank you.
Okay, I would just like to add a couple of dates to that. March 1st is the public hearing for the Appropriations Committee for Education for the state. So I want to try to get together basically a virtual busload of our constituents directed towards the board members. If anybody could reach out to their people they know, and try to get as many people as possible to get the public testimony. And also we have tomorrow, is it tomorrow? I don't know if everybody saw the email from CABE. CABE is going to be doing a presentation on the state budget and the state budget. Hold on, tomorrow at 11 a.m. is going to be a concert of the proposed budget, which is including a freeze or stop on the escalated amounts of ECS that was supposed to be going into effect, and it's going to be replaced with federal funding. So I think it's important for everybody to get on that webinar tomorrow and get more information so we can better tell our constituents what's going on. And does anybody have any questions on this portion of the presentation for Ms. Siegel? Ms. Brown? Oh,
I'm all set.
okay. So you look frozen. Mr. Benahan, any questions?
No questions, sir. Thank you.
Mr. Weldon?
No.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Siegel. Okay, Ms. Siegel, you may continue with the next item.
All right, I believe the next item is S or 2, is that correct?
No, ma'am, overtime report.
Okay, thank you.
Apologize.
Yeah, I don't have the agenda open in front of me.
Yeah, no, I was hoping you did. I was fudging it.
All right, so I just want to bring up that report. All right, so in December, the board requested an overtime report. So the report that we shared was reflective of data from July 1st of 2020 to December 4th, 2020. And we identified overtime expenditures in 5 areas: Board of Ed facilities, the stock room, which is also under the supervision of facilities, trades, which is also under the facilities department, school security, which operates under Lieutenant Grech, and payroll benefits. These were the main areas. We do have some overtime in the IT department, but that's primarily for the technicians when they work at the board meetings. Or other projects. So we wanted to focus in this report on the 5 major areas. And payroll benefits is not a major area. You can see by the amount, it's a very low number. So we separated the overtime into COVID-related expenditures in green, non-COVID in purple, and then the grand total. So for this 5-month period, approximately, facilities was clearly the highest, and they are usually every year the highest user of overtime for various reasons. And next would be the trades, and then school security, followed by stockroom. And payroll benefits is minimal. We need some overtime in the payroll benefits office in order to make certain that certain projects are completed, meaning reports that must be completed in order to be compliant with regulations, and payroll completion when necessary. Are there any questions?
Yes, I got a question. I'm looking at facilities and I'm trying to understand I see the cost breakdown between COVID and non-COVID. It seems the non-COVID overtime cost is roughly about 220% higher than overtime for COVID related. What is the non-COVID related overtime actually for, and how does it compare to the same period last year?
Well, I think the non-COVID related overtime is probably slightly lower than in prior years, but usually it's needed if there are custodians who are on leaves or absent, and there's a need to provide coverage during certain hours of the day. They may have to have a custodian who perhaps is on an early schedule go over to a school and work a late schedule where a custodian is not not available.
And
So
is that-
I think that's one of the factors. But clearly, Bobby Hammond, who's in charge of facilities, would be able to provide a more comprehensive explanation for the various circumstances that lead to overtime. We do ask as a general rule that overtime be controlled. It has to be approved by the supervisor. In the case of facilities, we do require that Bobby Hammond be aware of any requests for overtime in his department before overtime occurs, and approve the overtime before it takes place.
Yeah, would that also be probably a function of the diminished staff levels in facilities over time?
I'm sorry, I don't think I heard the first part of the question. A function
Okay.
of,
Could it also be a function of the diminished staffing levels in facilities that have been actually hit overtime? I do believe we've lost quite a few employees in facilities.
would what be, are you referring to approval of overtime?
No, the overtime, the overall as a driver of overtime costs. Less employees.
I think what he's saying is
Yeah, I can't hear.
could diminished
I'm sorry.
manpower over time be a contributor to the need for overtime?
Oh, in the current year?
Yeah,
I
could
think-
diminished
In
staffing.
any year.
Yeah, I think the hybrid schedules this year, the remote learning days and the hybrid schedule may result in reduced usage in of certain areas of the school. And so that could be a contributor to a reduced need for overtime.
Could
But
do you,
yeah,
do
but
you
that
know-
number seems high. I mean, what I'm getting at is if we could increase staffing levels with a value of 280, I don't know how many employees that will cover, $289,000. Can we see?
Well,
cost
I think you'd
savings?
have to speak with the superintendent and who would have more information about the directions that are being given to the facilities department.
Okay. All right, I think I'll put that on as it seems a bit more comprehensive than we're ready to handle right now, so I'll put that on probably next agenda for further exploration. And I guess that's all the questions I have. Ms. Brown, any questions?
I guess I would ask, like, is each department given a certain amount of overtime that they're able to give out? Or is that based off of what's provided for COVID or non-COVID? Does that make
Yeah.
sense?
Well, there isn't a specific budget. However, we allocate in the budget plan a line for overtime, and we base it on prior year expenses. And in the case of security and facilities, they know that they have to track their overtime expenses just as we are doing it in the finance area, and we're tracking it against the amount that we had in the budget, because we are focused on balancing our budget. And if we see trends leading toward the use of a higher amount, that would be a concern. There have been times in the last 9 years that we have identified some trends in various areas, and we have consulted with the responsible parties in order to develop plans to institute controls and control costs. But basically, if there's a need for overtime, for example, in security, I believe, and this would have to be verified, but I believe Lieutenant Grech, he makes the determination, but I believe he confers with the superintendent and informs the superintendent in advance that he's authorizing the overtime, and there's an agreement that it is necessary. Naturally, if there's an emergency condition, he's going to authorize it and then inform the superintendent. He's not going to wait for approval if there is an emergency situation.
Okay. Okay, Ms. Brown, are you finished?
Yes.
Okay. Mr. Benahan, do you have any questions?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. So, Ms. Siegel, question for you. So I'm a little confused because you say something and now you say that Mr. Testani have it, we to prove it. So each department had they in charge for the overtime, or had to be Mr. Testani is in charge for give the overtime for any staff of VOE?
In
That's my
every
question.
every department knows that they are not to authorize overtime unless it's absolutely required. And in the facilities department, Bobby Hammond generally approves overtime in advance for basic needs, as I described earlier. If there's a school where there's a custodian who's absent, he may have to have a custodian from another school come over, perhaps to have a late shift. So that would be an overtime situation. But it's my understanding that he keeps the superintendent informed. So he may not be asking for approval in each individual case because he has generalized approval. Now, if there's a special project or a special program that has to take place, and usually those types of projects would be with superintendent's knowledge and authorization, then he's going to say to the superintendent, I need to authorize overtime in order to fulfill the requirements of this project. And the superintendent will give him the authorization to go ahead.
That's included for security department too with Mr. Greg, not only Mr. Bobby Hammond.
Well, again, school security is under the direction of the police department. Lieutenant Greg operates very responsibly in terms of complying with fiscal guidelines. But the first priority is safety and security of everyone in the school system.
Yeah, okay. Thank you, Ms. Siegel. No more question, Mr. Chair.
Joe, I kind of have a follow-up question.
Sure,
Ms.
go ahead.
Siegel, so so if outside, and so say for instance, the city is putting on something that needs to use one of our buildings, does that are we paying that overtime, or is the city paying that overtime for those that are working through? Because you're going to need the custodian to open up the doors. You're going to need is that us giving them that overtime?
Yeah. So if there's a city activity, for example, the city is now conducting COVID vaccine clinics on Saturdays. And they are utilizing our nurses. They're also utilizing IT staff with the approval of the superintendent. And those timesheets are coded for charges to the city account. We have been given a city account code, and those expenses are charged to the city.
Okay.
Yeah, and I've got a question as well that Mr. Benahan actually raised and made me think of. As far as the police department budget, and excuse me, I misspoke. School security overtime budget. That's the only budget overtime that's approved by an employee that is not under the direct direction of Superintendent Testani of the Board of Education. It's under the city of Bridge. The police department works under the city of Bridgeport, correct?
Correct.
So yeah, so I'm just wondering about. I got you, I'll get you in a second, Mr. Chair. I see. So I'm just wondering what kind of check and balances on that, and see if we're utilizing the least expensive employee to actually do the overtime. Say during normal times, there's a basketball game, putting a security guard in place rather than a police officer, or a school play or something, and rather than have a lower cost security officer on overtime rather than a higher cost police department employee on things. I think that's something I know you really can't answer that question if it's a good approach or not, but I don't know. I think there might need to be a check and balance on that of some sort if there's not one already in place. Okay, I'll move on to Mr. Weldon. Mr. Weldon, question?
So I was going to try to clarify the kind of thing you were talking about. Like Albert was talking about Mr. Hammond approving overtime, but Lieutenant Grech getting authority from the superintendent to approve overtime. And that would be because Lieutenant Grech is not a Board of Ed employee. So he is not in a position to be unilaterally authorizing overtime for security. In his circumstance, he's going to have to go to the superintendent, and they would likely decide what the most cost-effective way of utilizing overtime would be. Are they going to use police officers? Are they going to use guards? And then, you know, who is entitled to the overtime if you're going to use guards or police? Who's entitled to that overtime based on seniority? They have to go down a list. So they would make those decisions together. And I think that's the difference between facilities and security, is that Grech does not work for us. He has to get approval from the superintendent. Whereas Mr. Hammond, he has the authority to make the decision, and he keeps the superintendent informed, but he doesn't necessarily need to get the approval. So I wanted to make that kind of clarification. And the other thing was that I think it would be helpful if, beside these numbers, we had an indication of what percent of the total payroll for these departments does this overtime represent. You know, I got it. It's, you know, you got 395 for
Definitely
facilities, and for the total payroll paid in that period, what percentage of the total payroll does that 395 represent? And I know you may not know that off the top of your head, but I think if we had
Well,
that outside.
I mean, we know facilities has a budget of, you know, $26 million. So that's a, you know, it's a rough number, maybe 26.5. I have to go back and look at the exact number. And this is for July through December. So, you know, this can easily become, by the end of the year, $1 million. But, you know, it could be 3 to 4% over the course of the year.
That 26 million is strictly payroll, or their total budget?
Total with supplies and
Okay.
maintenance.
If you pulled out and just compared it to actual wages, you're saying this could be 4% of total wages paid?
3 to 4 well,
Okay.
no, 3 to 4% of the total budget.
Right. But not of wages.
Excuse me?
But not 3 to 4% of total wages.
No, 3 to 4% of the total budget, which includes significant funding for, that would include repairs, maintenance, all
Yeah.
the other components of.
I guess what I'm saying is, if we know what the total wages are, wages only, for each of these departments, and we can see what portion of total wages are overtime between the departments, we can see who's the dominant overtime department.
Well, clearly the dominant overtime is coming from facilities. It's facilities plus stockroom plus trades.
No, I would like to see.
Excuse me?
I would like to see what percentage of overtime this number represents in terms of total wages. I'm not interested in supplies and all that other stuff, because this is a wage number. 395 is a wage number. So what percentage of the total wages paid in facilities does that 395 represent?
Well, it's probably in the range of 2%, 2.5%.
Yeah, no, I'm not asking you to give me a number now. I'm saying, if we're looking at this table going forward, it would be good to have that percentage alongside it, so that we can see how they all compare with each other. So if BOE Facilities is giving out 4% in overtime, stockroom is giving out, I don't know, 6%, or what, but it gives us something to really measure against, because absent that, we don't have anything to show how these really relate to each other. I mean, is the staffing of, you know, school security is $44,000. How many security guards are there? What's their total wage budget? facilities is going to be clearly much larger, but by how much? So I think if we have those percentages, we can start to see, are these overtime numbers kind of comparable with one another in terms of percentage? Or is there one that's just completely out of whack proportionately? But we can't see that here because there are no percentages of how this shows in terms of the wages.
Right. Yeah, I concur with Chairman Weldon. I think that's a very good idea. In addition
I
to
agree
that,
too.
I think it would also be beneficial to also have a year-to-year comparison or year-to-date with whatever information we're looking at, so we can see if it's trending upwards or downwards, if things are getting out of control. So, and I think all our data, I think we should start striving as a board, because it's to the fellow board members. But any data presented to us should have such a breakdown for comparison purposes, whether it be discipline, demographic data on various issues and such. And I think we should have the superintendent standardize that across all departments to have information presented in a more easily understandable and comparable manner for all of us board members to consume, because we are not experts, and it's easier to pick out those disparities the way Chairman Weldon mentioned. Okay, Mr. Benahan?
I agree as well, Joe. It makes it easier for us to understand, and also too, some of the questions that we're probably asking, if it was broken down just a little bit better, we won't have to ask them because we'll be able to see it through the information.
Exactly. Mr. Benahan?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, thank you. I agree with what Mr. John Warden said, but I have a question to Mr. John Warden. You said that police department, Lieutenant Greg, for approval overtime, they had to go to Mr. Testani because he don't work for the Board of Education. So Mr. Bobby Hammond, he worked for the Board of Education at the same time he worked for the city. So he can't, doesn't matter he worked for the city, he can't. So he can make the proof for the overtime?
No, my understanding is Mr. Hammond works for the district.
Okay.
His paycheck comes from the district.
No, Mr. Hammond is on the payroll of the city.
Well, then why is he approving overtime? Unilaterally.
He's the director of facilities for the Board of Education, funded by the city.
Yeah, it seems a little odd. Because I mean, if we're treating it the same way, Lieutenant Greg works for the police department, but he's not unilaterally awarding overtime. If Mr. Hammond technically works for Public Works, but is on assignment to us, but we're not writing his paycheck, I mean, I don't know. Maybe we're getting too much in the weeds. I just thought I was clarifying why Lieutenant Greg operates the way he does versus the way Mr. Hammond does. I don't know.
Yeah, I think maybe we need to raise some of that with personnel. We could just get a breakdown of the of our chart of the hierarchy chart or whatever. Who responds to who?
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Joe.
Any more questions on this agenda item? Okay, so we're ready to move on to the next agenda item, which is the ESER 2 funding.
All right. All right, so I brought up on the screen my notes on ESER 2. So the new grant for COVID-related relief is called ESSER 2, E-S-S-E-R. It's going to expire on September 30th of 2023. The current CARES Act grant expires on September 30th of 2022. So the ESSER grant provides an additional year. The amount for Bridgeport is $40,569,188. The state allocated the funds on the basis of our respective share of funds received under Title I in fiscal year 2020. There is not a requirement for equitable services to non-public schools this time. I understand there's a separate mechanism that the state is using as per federal guidelines to provide support to non-public schools. So our funding is total. And the primary goals are educational recovery and learning acceleration for every student. The federal guidelines and the state priorities are delineated in the document that I shared. And the state identified 4 primary priorities: academic supports, learning loss, learning acceleration and recovery, equity and access. Second, family and community connections. 3, school safety and social emotional well-being of the whole student and of our school staff. And 4, remote learning, staff development, and the digital divide. All resource allocations that a district makes must be COVID related. So to be clear, these funds cannot be used for standard operating expenses. For example, you could not use these funds to pay the salary of a principal of a school. You could not use these funds to pay the salary of the teacher of a 2nd grade class, which would be organized and in operation under ordinary conditions. But you can use the funds in accordance with the priority areas for expenses that are COVID related. So if there is a curriculum project that a district is planning, and that curriculum project involves, as ours always do, digital services to enable and support the utilization of technological devices for remote learning when needed, that certainly can be supported. So there are certain aspects of our strategic educational plan that meet the requirements for this type of funding, because those elements such as curriculum renewal or technological renewal are absolutely connected with COVID-related services. Now, the state is developing a new ESSER II application, which will not only be the application, obviously, that we have to submit, but it's also going to be designed, we have been told, as a planning tool. The application is not yet online. It will require, we have been informed, a needs assessment, and we were informed that the state will be providing the assessments so the districts do not have to spend any additional money of their own on purchasing assessments. The purpose of the needs assessment is to enable the state and the LEA to identify specifically the educational gaps created by the pandemic. It's also going to require an articulation of the steps that will be taken to mitigate those gaps, and then a description of the intended alignment of resources under ESSER I, which we know as the CARES Act, and then there's ESSER II. To implement the plan over the summer and the 21-22 school year. Now, pending receipt of the state's planning tool and the requirements for assessments, we're in the process of designing with the superintendent a preliminary 2.25-year program. So I called it a 2.25-year program because it would basically extend over 21-22, 22-23, and then of course it would end September 30th of 23. And the associated budget plan that would encompass the targeted resource allocations for multiple interconnected services to address our needs. The state anticipates updates from districts that they're going to use to assess plan implementation. So we understand they're going to have a monitoring component, as they do in other grants such as Alliance. And we're anticipating that we won't need to draw on these funds until the new year, meaning 21-22, starting July 1st, because we still have some CARES Act funds we did build into our 21-22 budget plan, utilizing at least $1 million from CARES Act funds that will roll over into the new year on services that, as I mentioned earlier, are part of our strategic plan, but qualified because they can be classified as supplemental services, that they can qualify as COVID related, because those services such as curriculum renewal or technological renewal are necessary in order to meet the needs associated with the COVID pandemic. So we will utilize our CARES Act resources first, and that's a requirement for continuation of the services that are in our CARES application. I mentioned technology renewal. There will probably be a need for some level of PPE for several months, possibly into all of next year, as the pandemic hopefully winds down. And I mentioned digital educational services. There are COVID-related substitute services for teachers and for paraprofessionals. So there's a multitude of services that we have been providing with the CARES Act funding that will continue to provide with ESSER II. But of course, with ESSER II, considering the magnitude of the grant, we will have the capacity to provide multiple other services. I'm not going to describe any of those services tonight because all plans are preliminary and we have not yet received the specific guidelines from the state. But as I did indicate, we expect that we will have a component for technology renewal. We expect we'll have a component for instructional and curriculum renewal, specifically digital educational resources. We expect to have a component for continuation of supplemental teacher support in our schools, specifically our building sub program. We expect to have most likely some additional services in the summer, and a multitude of other services that would address learning loss and help all of our students to accelerate their academic growth once they return to school. Are there any questions?
Yes, Ms. Siegel. I got a couple. How do these numbers figure into the government's announcement of his budget? Because he said, in reports, he has said that there's going to be no increase in 2020, 22, 23, no escalated increase in the ECS formula that is being taken care of through the federal funds that are being distributed. Is that going to be, do we know if that's going to be inclusive of the $40 million? Or is it going to come from a separate?
I'm not clear on your question. Are you referring to state alliance and state ECS funding?
State ECS funding.
Well, we don't have information on the state legislative session at this point. There'll be a meeting with the delegation this Friday. As I've indicated, the state budget plan, as announced last year in relation to the ECS formula, specified that Bridgeport would receive an additional $2.3 million, and I believe it was approximately the same amount in each successive year until reaching a specified level, based on their plan to reach what they defined as an equitable level of funding. Now,
Right, let me stop. I'm sorry, Ms. Siegel, let me stop you
Yeah.
right there. Governor Lamont just announced constructively that plan is on hold and being.
I don't have any information. Do you have? I don't have that information.
All right, yeah, I'll forward it to you later, but what he basically
So
said is
because
that's on hold.
again, I want to emphasize that the funding in the ESSER 2 grant is not for standard operating expenses. You know,
Understood, 100%,
I can utilize ESSER 2 funding for certain types of services, as we have done with other grants in the past, and that helps us to meet our educational needs, which is our primary priority, as well as balance the budget. But I can't use it for basic operating expenses. So we rely on the city share of the operating budget and the ECS portion of the operating budget and the Alliance ECS portion for our operating expenses. So in our budget request, we specified that we built in the anticipated $2.3 million of additional funding in Alliance ECS. Now, if that does not happen, then we're short $2.3 million, and would have to explore how to utilize ESSER 2 and other sources of funding for valid services that meet the criteria of the respective grants in order to balance the budget.
Right,
Right, and
I believe I in a total.
and we are planning for that contingency.
Yeah, let's hope, because we as a board understand it. I'm pretty sure we've gone over it over and over, but it appears that our state government and our local government views these dollars as a relief of their fiscal responsibility of supporting our operating costs going forward in the system, and we need to find a way to emphasize and get it through their heads that it's not a piggy bank. This is to help the children of the city of Bridgeport to overcome their learning loss and all the problems that they've had over and over again.
Right, and we have to remember that this funding is temporary.
Correct, absolutely, 100% agree and on board. And it's just that just the things I'm hearing in the ether is that you don't need money because you got this money. And I'm just wondering just how bad it's going to get, because if you don't see, it's like inflicting internal damage that you can't see it because there's no blood, but it's still there and it's still damaging. and it's concerning. It's concerning me that we may end up worse off due to this funding in the long run, because we need to fund our operating costs year to year to year. Okay, that's all I got on that. We definitely got to make the people aware. Now, since we're talking about a larger portion of the budget, very large, this is $40 million plus dollars. That's a very large portion of this budget. I would like to see this. Don't know if my fellow committee members agree. I would like to see this brought to the full board for approval, since it's such a significant amount. I mean, when we had budget cuts and all the like in the past, we were responsible for the budget cuts, and we had to approve the budget cuts, sometimes on a line item basis. Yeah. But seeing as this is a good 18% of our operating budget of the operating budget, I think the board should have more.
Right. Well, we're understood. Number one, I'm sure you understand you would have to speak with the superintendent. Number two, we're not at that point yet. We have not yet received the written state guidelines. We're awaiting information on the needs assessments. And clearly, if the state is requiring specific needs assessments, we need to conduct those needs assessments first, identify the needs, and associate the services that we're thinking about with those needs before bringing any proposed plan to the board. So I understand your request, and certainly I'm sure that the superintendent will honor that. But I just want to be clear, we're not at that point yet.
Absolutely, and there may be a board member or two who have some suggestions as to what kind of programming that fits within the ES.
Yeah, I would just suggest that we wait.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, Mr. Saw, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but I would just suggest that we wait for the guidelines. We determine what we have to do in order to comply with the state's requirements, and keep the board up to date on those requirements and our plan for implementation. And then once we have data, superintendent can work with the board on any discussions or presentations of the proposed allocation plan. So as I said, we are working on a preliminary resource allocation plan. So we're ready. Clearly, superintendent has spoken with me, and we've discussed various types of services that may be included, but we have to conduct the developmental process that the state defines first.
Absolutely. Sorry, I was on mute. Ms. Brown, any questions?
No questions, but I do agree with both of you guys as far as, once we get all the valid information, we do put something together. Joe, I was even thinking that maybe remember when Superintendent Testani was doing the different info sessions at the different schools, maybe doing something, bringing it to Facebook Live and having Ms. Siegel and Mr. Testani do the presentation so that people who don't understand what's actually happened can still be able to be privy to the information on a larger scale and just breaking it down, because this is a lot of information, but once it's all solidified, I do think that, being able to present it in a technology way for the community to be able to understand what's going on, I think will be very helpful. But that's all I have.
I agree. Mr. Benham?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just suggest for you as the chair of this committee. I know Ms. Eagle said we had to wait until they give the information, but you as the chair of this committee, I suggest for you, Mr. Chair, that you can request or send any information and suggest that what you need and what you ask for, so we don't need to wait when we receive the information and then we have to wait more because you suggest or you ask more questions. So almost better like I prepare you like as the chair of this committee, you prepare yourself. What do you want? What do you need? So whatever the state come or Ms. Siegel give it to you or Mr. Testani, so in one shot you can have all the information. So we don't need to be waiting for another month, another meeting. So I suggest you as a chair, you suggest, request the information you just said. That's it, Mr. Chair, and I agree with what Ms. Brown said.
I understand what you're asking, Mr. Benham, but a lot of the information information that does not exist, we can't get just yet. But we could do some preliminary discussions around assumed information that will be coming, and what have you, amongst ourselves in various committees, what we would like to see.
I know it's a lot of questions. I understand it's a lot of questions. It's a lot of things is not there yet, but I know as a professional we can know what kind of question and what we request, so we don't need to wait so long. I understand, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Chairman Weldon, any questions?
No.
Okay, so I believe that's it on this item, unless you have anything else you'd like to add, Ms. Siegel?
All right, thank you.
Is that it on this item, Ms. Siegel? Because I'm
Yes, I'm locating the legal services.
Hold on before you do that. I'm gonna ask for a motion to postpone that because we're going to actually do that in a more comprehensive manner in a special meeting where we can have legal present to discuss. So
All
can I
right.
have a motion to postpone basically postpone that?
Motion to postpone this portion of the presentation.
And I will second that. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Now, that's the last item on the agenda. I will seek a motion to adjourn,
Motion to adjourn.
and I'll second that. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Everybody, great meeting. Thank you very much. Thank you to all the staff present, and thank you for your patience and while we worked out our technical difficulties for this meeting. Everybody have a great evening. Be safe and be well.
Thank you.
Good night.
Be safe,
Good night.
everyone.
Good night.
Thank you.
God bless you. God bless everyone.
Good night.